Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Danbury. My name is Annie Chenal, and I'd like to welcome you here. If you could take a minute to silence your phones and turn to your neighbor and greet them, we can do that now.
Turn and silence your neighbor.
I have a few announcements for you today. So the first one is that our speaker today will be the Reverend Hank Peirce, who is a childhood friend of Reverend Tony's. I would like you to stay a few minutes after the service where we'll be voting on whether to install acoustic panels. Ann Mustard's retreat is coming this afternoon at 4 o'clock for our Music on the Ridge. So I appreciate if you all could come today. My name is Annie Chenal, and I've been part of this congregation for 5 years. And I have spent most of those 5 years making coffee. The Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Danbury has been gathering together for 200 years. And as we work to build a more just world, we respectfully acknowledge that our physical building is on the traditional land of the Pecasset people. I'm so glad that you're able to join us this morning because you are an essential part of the celebration today. Whether today is your first day or your 1,000th Sunday in our midst, in person or online, we are stronger because of you. If you're new to our community and joining us online, we invite you to introduce yourself and where you're connecting from in the chat box as you're comfortable. At the conclusion of today's service, you will have a chance to participate in a traditional breakout group for individual connections and deeper check-ins. And if you are new and here in person, please fill out a visitor card at the table near the exit before you leave. We are one people of many beliefs, many origins, sexualities, and genders. We are all growing, all learning, all loved. Just as you are welcome here. And we'll sing our gathering song.
Now, Tony told me that you all like to sing, so I chose this hymn. It is, I have to admit, it's one of my favorite hymns. It appears in our teal hymnal. I know that you have a great big screen, but it's "Shall we gather at the river?" And it's a question, right? So shall we gather at the river? And the answer is yes. So I want you, in a few moments, I'm going to ask you to rise as you are able and willing. So when that line comes, shall we gather the river? And the answer is yes. I want you to give a yes. You could even do this, like we're all pirates. Yes. So all right, that helps us get everything moving, get the blood and air moving here. Thank you, Barbara. So here our first hymn. Please rise as you are willing and able. Shall we gather at the river, where bright angels' feet have trod, crystal tide forever, flowing by the throne of God. Yes, we'll gather at the river, the beautiful river. Gather with the saints at the river that flows by the throne of God. On the margin of the river, washing up its silver spray, we will walk and worship ever all the happy golden day. Yes, we'll gather at the river, the beautiful river. Gather with the saints at the river that flows by the throne of God. Here we reach the shining river, lay we every burden down. Grace our spirits will deliver and provide a robe and a crown. Yes, we'll gather at the river, the beautiful river. Gather with the saints at the river that flows by the throne of God. Soon we'll reach the shining river. Soon our pilgrimage will cease. Soon our happy hearts will quiver with the melody of peace. Yes, we'll gather at the river, the beautiful river. Gather with the saints at the river that flows by the throne of God. Yes, we'll gather at the river, the beautiful river. Gather with the saints at the river that flows by the throne of God, that flows by the throne of God. Thank you. Please be seated. We're gonna
like the chalice.
like the chalice. That's it.
Like the chalice.
Would you join us all in, as Andy helps to like this, the chalice affirmation. Love is the spirit of this congregation, and justice is its light. This is our covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek and speak the truth in love, and to help one another and celebrate life.
All right, and please join me in our children's affirmation. We are Unitarian Universalists. We are people with open minds, loving hearts, and helping hands. We care for the earth and each other. And Reverend Hank Pierce has a great story for us this morning.
Let me get the props.
Oh, we're going to get the props first.
I live just outside of Boston, and I thought like I was somewhere around Framingham when I went, the props. So thank you, Sierra Marie, for providing some props for me. So I grew up in the Unitarian Universalist Church in New Bedford, Massachusetts, a giant stone church with big pews and a very formal setting. And when I was about 8 years old, and my mother was the chair of the Women's Alliance, they discovered a closet full of old footstools that had been stashed in there at one point. And they brought them all out and they said, these are really nice, but what should we do with them? And my mother, being seeing an opportunity both to be creative and to create community, my mom said, we are going to the Women's Alliance, where each of us, we're going to take one of these footstools home, and each one of us will decorate it. Now, I have 2 examples of footstools here, and neither of them are like the footstools we have in the church. But let me just show you what the 2 I have here. Right? So, one I got out of your kitchen, and the other one here that Sierra Marie found. Where did you find this? Where was this?
This is my office.
Oh, it's in your office. Oh. Look at this. This is a very good footstool. But they're things that you would put your feet up on when you're in the pews. And for our young people, and for those of you who don't remember, sometimes sitting in church is kind of boring. And so my sister and myself and my friend Ron and everybody else, we would at first when we were very little, we could barely stretch from our seats and get our feet down onto the footstools. But they were something that was really important. And each one of these footstools were taken home by members of the congregation. And each one of them decided that they would they'd put new fabric in it, they'd put some cushioning in there. Some people did needlepoint, my mother did rug hooking. And then there was this big event when they were going to put out all of these footstools in the pews. And I remember my sister and I and my other classmates, we would sort of run up and down the aisles, looking at all the different pews, how they looking in the different pews, looking at the different footstools. Some had symbols of whaling. New Bedford was the great whaling port, and others were just sort of geometric designs. Some looked very modern. Some looked very very traditional. Some were just one color, just a big piece of fabric over it. And I loved that. And I think of that today because what it taught me in a really simple way was that in our church, we can be whoever you are. This is a place for you to be your authentic self. And if you want to be flashy, that's great. And if you want to be humble and quiet, that is fine too. We are a place that accepts people regardless of what their footstools look like. And it was such an important lesson for me that as I go out and have been a minister now for 25 years, I still carry that image of those footstools every time I come to a new congregation and I get to preach someplace and I get to meet new people. There is obviously things that are similar, but there are also so many things that are different, and that this is a wonderful container. Our congregations are wonderful containers for all the differences of life. And that is truly great. Now, did folks get some? Shall I just, I'm going to hand it to you?
I can introduce us.
Thank you. Here we go. All right,
No
thanks.
problem. Okay, so any children who would like to come downstairs with me now into programming can do so. Follow me, and we will all sing This Little Light of Mine.
I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine.
This little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine.
Let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. This is a time in the service when you are invited to come forward to share a word of something that is on your heart. A joy, a sorrow, a milestone. You're invited to come forward to place a stone here. You can do it silently, or you can share it in the microphone here. Let me just, I'll raise the microphone up to a level where folks can use it. Please feel free to come forward and to share what is on your heart. Generous Spirit of life and love, we hold in our thoughts and our prayers this morning the people of Israel and Palestine. We pray for peace. And we pray for comfort for those affected by this horrible earthquake in Afghanistan. We think of those in our community and those beyond our community struggling with health issues. And may our hands be your hands to lessen the pain of those around us. So for all those thoughts expressed and those we've kept in the silent sanctuaries of our hearts, let us reflect for a few moments in silence. And let us sing our hymn of reflection, Spirit of Life. Our reading this morning is by the Palestinian-American writer Naomi Shihab Nye. I chose this reading earlier this week before the events of yesterday, and yet it fits. It's called Gate A4. Wandering around the Albuquerque Airport Terminal, after learning my flight had been delayed for 4 hours, I heard an announcement. If anyone in the vicinity of gate A4 understands any Arabic, please come to the gate immediately. Well, one pauses these days. Gate A4 was my own gate. I went there. An older woman in full traditional Palestinian embroidered dress, just like my grandma wore, was crumpled to the floor, wailing loudly. "Help," said the flight service person. "Talk to her. What is her problem?" We told her her flight was delayed, and she did this. I stooped, put my arm around the woman, and spoke to her haltingly. "Shadao Shabidwik Hababiti? Stani Shwai Min Fadlik Shubutsi Siwi?" The minute she heard any words she knew, however poorly used, she stopped crying. She thought the flight had been canceled entirely. She needed to be in El Paso for major medical treatment the next day. I said, "No, we're fine. You'll get there, just later. Who is picking you up? Let's call them." We called her son, and I spoke to him in English. I told him I would stay with his mother till we got on the plane, and I would ride next to her. She talked to him. Then we called her other sons, just for the fun of it. Then we called my dad, and he and she spoke for a while in Arabic and found out they had, of course, 10 shared friends. Then I thought, for the heck of it, why not call some Palestinian poets I know and let them chat with her? This all took up to 2 hours. She was laughing a lot by then, telling me about her life, patting my knee, answering questions. She'd pulled a sack of these homemade mamoul cookies, little powdered sugar crumbly mounds stuffed with dates and nuts, out of her bag, and was offering them to all the women at the gate. To my amazement, every woman took one. Not a single woman declined. It was like a sacrament. The traveler from Argentina, the mom from California, the lovely woman from Laredo. We were all covered with the same powdered sugar and smiling. There is no better cookie. And then the airline broke out free beverages from a huge cooler, and 2 little girls from our flight ran around serving us all apple juice, and they were covered with powdered sugar as well. And then I noticed my new best friend, by now we were holding hands, that she had a potted plant poking out of her bag, some medicinal thing with green furry leaves. Such an old country tradition. Always carry a plant. Always stay rooted somewhere. And I looked around that gate of late, and I looked at the weary ones, and I thought, this is the world I want to live in. The shared world. Not a single person in that gate, once the crying and confusion stopped, seemed apprehensive about any other person. They all took the cookies. I wanted to hug all those other women too. This can still happen anywhere. Not everything is lost. It is time for an offering. You are invited to give as liberally as you can, and as a guest minister, I get to say, give in crazy, radical amounts of money to help support this beloved community that you have loved and has been here in this fine city for over 2 centuries. The offering will now be given and joyfully received. Every year in Somerville, Massachusetts, over this Indigenous Peoples Weekend, there is a festival, the Honk Festival. That's what those that film came from. The Honk Festival is a festival of radical marching bands from across the country and sometimes from around the world who come and play, perform, and celebrate, and then also go out and protest. They end the entire weekend. So it happened yesterday, playing in Davis Square. Today, there's a big parade down from Davis Square in Somerville to Harvard Square, and a big celebration there. And then everyone goes and they play outside the city jail in Boston to remind the prisoners there that they are not forgotten. Imagine, if you will, that there is a large cave and there are some prisoners who've been chained in that cave for as long as they can remember. And they are chained in such a way where they can't see each other and they can't see the outside world. The only part of the outside world they can see are some shadows that pass in front of the mouth of that appear on the back of the cave, the back wall of the cave, from people who pass by the mouth of the cave. To entertain themselves and to try to keep themselves feeling connected to the outside world, these soldiers have taken up some of the ability to decipher what those shadows are, who these people are. They've created amazing understandings of who those shadows are. They'll say, oh, there's that little dog that passes every morning. And there's that young boy maybe on his way to school. And is that an elderly woman? And what is she carrying? Is she carrying a footstool today? And then one day, one of these soldiers is released. He's unchained and he's dragged up to the mouth of the cave and left there. At first, the light is too bright and he cannot understand the images around him. His eyes take a long time to get to adjust to the light. But soon, he's able to see the real world, the world outside the cave. And soon enough, that dog that they'd just seen as a shadow for so long, that actual dog comes by and it sniffs him, and he's able to reach out and feel its fur. And then he sees the elderly woman and the footstool that she's carrying. And after a little while, he realizes that each of these figures casts its own shadow. And he realizes that the shadows that he and his comrades in the cave had been seeing are just shadows. They're not the real world. The soldiers had been there for so long, they had come to think those shadows were the real world. But now he's in the real world and he's experiencing it. And he knows he needs to go back to the cave to see his old comrades and tell them this news about the difference between the real world and the shadow world. And he goes back to the cave and he sees his friends and he tells them what he's seen outside the cave. And at first they think he's crazy and they laugh at him. And they ask him if he can decipher the shadows that are passing by on that wall right then. But it's been too long. He can no longer really figure out what it is anymore. And he keeps trying to tell them about what he's seen. And now they're getting a little tired of him. Now they start to think that he's making fun of them. And they get upset and they're angry and they shove him. They get violent with him because they don't like his version of reality that he's trying to share with them. Now, I'm sure most of you recognize this as Plato's story of the cave. Plato told this story for two reasons. First, to say that it was difficult to be a philosopher trying to educate the public. And second is to point out his idea of ideal forms. Point one. So Plato said that most people are comfortable in their ignorance, and that some may become hostile to anyone who points that ignorance out. Socrates, his mentor and friend, had been sentenced to death by the Athenian government for disrupting the social order. We need only to look to the folks from January 6th who violently resisted the reality that they were being told. People, more often than not, want to live in a world of shadows. Many, many years ago, back before the pandemic, I used to belong to an online clergy group. And in this chat group, hundreds and hundreds of people of different ages and abilities, different races, different classes, different expressions of their genders, everyone that I knew from seminary were on this chat group. However, this chat group tended to be dominated by a group of older white guys. Guys who were older and whiter than even me. And no matter, in this chat group, people would write in, they'd ask a question, they'd talk about some issue going on in their congregation. And no matter what happened, whatever was written down, whatever questions were asked, these older white guys tended to steer the conversation back to being about them. And not surprising, folks got frustrated with that. And when people got frustrated with that, often these guys reacted in a way that says, where they would say, "Why are you attacking us?" Which made it even more infuriating for everyone else. Well, one time after a giant blowout where people were leaving and angry and couldn't understand each other. Now these are all good Unitarian Universalist clergy. Everyone means well. But after this big blowout, a friend of mine got onto the chat group and he started writing in a way that I thought really helped everyone understand what the situation is and how we should understand the context. He began to write about Copernicus. I know that many of you are thinking right now, Hank, on this lovely fall Sunday, you've spoken about Plato, and now you're going to talk about Copernicus. Just stay with me, folks. Honest. I know it sounds like we're in a classics class, but hang with me. So Copernicus, as you all remember, was a 15th century astronomer and a mathematician. And it was he that realized that the Earth was not the center of the universe, which up until that time, most people in the West had it just assumed. They believed that the Earth was the center of the universe and that everything revolved around us. But he, in the 15th century, said, no, the Earth revolves around the sun. Copernicus said the sun was the center and the Earth revolved around that. And then a few decades later, a man named Bruno said, nope, you know what? The sun itself is only one star among an infinite universe. The sun is the center of our solar system, but there is a vast universe and there is no center. It goes on forever and ever in ways we cannot understand, cannot comprehend. For pre-Copernican people who knew the Earth as the center of the universe, it must have been really frustrating to interact with others who related to the actual infinite universe in which there was no center. These days, pre-Copernican white men and white women and white folks still roam the earth, seeing their perspective as objective, their priorities as normal, and their needs as primary. This is the world that most of us have grown up in. And it feels good to inhabit the center of the universe. It's, in fact, difficult to understand when it only starts to feel uncomfortable when it's pointed out that we aren't the center of the universe. For most of us, we've grown up in all of the institutions, the policies, the dictionaries, all upheld this guiding fiction that we were the center of the universe. In a generous moment, a pre-Copernican white man will entertain the perspective of, say, an African-American woman, but only if her opinion orbits, accents, and affirms the centrality of the truth. That is, that white man's perspective. Here's a list of some of the world's fastest growing cities. Fuzhou, Ankara, Zhoumin, Hangzhou, Kunming, Dubai, Bursa, Istanbul. What all of these cities, these centers of vitality, have in common is that none of them is driven by a pre-Copernican white man's perspective. None of those cities are the fruit of the Enlightenment, or even a reaction to it. So the pre-Copernican white man who insists that his perspective is the objective truth is not only inaccurate, it is also increasingly absurd. Still, pre-Copernican folk, when challenged, speak louder and with more bravado, trying to snare us back into their orbit. They want us to believe that the shadows on the wall are real, and that the universe revolves around them. They want us to believe that vaccines don't work, and that there are good people on both sides of white supremacist rallies. Now, the second reason why Plato talked about the world of shadows was to explain his concept of ideal forms. Like the shadows on the wall, things in the physical world are just flawed reflections of ideal forms. Plato believed that everything in the real world are mere shadows of an ultimate ideal form. So this morning when I talked about footstools and I pulled up two different examples of footstools, we can look at those and kind of go, yeah. But even before I pulled those objects up, even before I had my props, as soon as I said a footstool, each of you imagined in your mind a footstool. And I will bet $1 to a donut that every one of you had a different image. If we were able to print out the image in your minds of a footstool at that moment, and we look through them, there'd be something footstoolish about all of them, but they would not be the same. Plato believed that there was an ideal thing somewhere out there. The theologians who came after Plato loved this idea, and they extended his idea not just to physical things like footstools, but to emotions and values. And thus there must be an ultimate form of truth someplace, an ultimate form of love. And then Christian theologians took up this idea and said, yes, and it is God who is the one who is the keeper of all of these ultimate ideals. It is God who is the ultimate form of love. It is God who knows the ultimate truth. God is the great librarian, the keeper of all of these ideal forms. Now, this idea impacts us as Unitarian Universalists in a very interesting way. First, if we start off with this idea that only God has all the truth, what that means is that every one of us knows part of the truth. Every one of us knows part of the truth. Every one of us have an image of what a footstool is. Every one of us have an understanding of what love is. But none of us know everything. We all know a part, and no one knows everything. And this realization should keep us hungry and humble. It should keep us hungry, searching for more truths, and humble for the realization that we don't know everything. What this teaches us as Unitarian Universalists is that we all have a part of the truth, and yet none of us have all the truth. So this should leave us hungry, striving to find out more truth, but also humble, knowing that we will never get to know everything. It was this understanding that allowed the Transcendentalists to begin to explore other religious traditions, to realize that revelation is not sealed, that words and values from other traditions can inform our own, and that we should be open to them. I remember I had a professor in seminary who was teaching us about Buddhism. And he assigned us all these different readings. And I have to admit, there were a bunch of really disparate and kind of crazy books. The first book we read was the Diamond Sutra, which is a very ancient text and very difficult to understand. The next reading we had was about a Buddhist monk who rode motorcycles. And another story was about a Buddhist monk who didn't seem very Buddhist or monk-like at all. So after the first couple of weeks, we asked him in class why we were reading all of these different stories. And he said to us, if I taught you Buddhism the same way people teach Christianity, you would learn about the life of Buddha, maybe a couple hundred years after his death. And then you'd go out from these doors and you'd go out into the world and you'd meet some real Buddhists and you ask them what they believed and how they practiced. And it would seem that everything I taught you in this class was a lie. Because Buddhists in the real world don't necessarily think about just the Buddha and the first couple hundred years. They have many different traditions that have spread around the world. And then he used an illustration that has stuck with me for years and years. He said, you know those glass prisms that you have that you hang in front of a window? He said, every time you read one of these books, every time you read one of these stories, a new window is opened. And by looking in all of these different windows in this glass prism, you begin to gain a better understanding as to what is at the center of Buddhism. As Unitarian Universalists, we think about the Platonic concept of ideal forms differently. We acknowledge that no one has all the truth about the truth, or the sacred, or God. We don't believe that one person or one group has the truth about religion. Sure, some have studied more, reflected more, experienced more, and those things are brought in and shared and we all become richer for it. For those of you who have ever taken part in a small group, it's always amazing when you sit down and you start to have conversations with these people that you might have known for years, that you might have taught classes together with your children and your friends' children. And you sit down and you ask them what brought them here, or what they believe about life and death, and the great questions that we all have. This is the basis of all Unitarian Universalist theology. This idea that we all have some truth and that no one has all the truth. This is how we can have someone who is a Christian and someone who is a Buddhist and someone is a humanist together in the same congregation. This understanding that every one of us holds a little bit of the truth, allows us to have the theological diversity that we pride ourselves in, because it allows us to continue on the journey to gather more information, to get closer to what the truth might actually be. When we think back to our reading, thinking of the older woman who was crying and the staff who were frustrated because they couldn't understand each other, it makes me think that maybe the role of our faith is to help those who have different understandings of the world to come together. Maybe the role of Unitarian Universalism is to bring together people of different religious beliefs, different political beliefs, to share words of compassion, bringing them into circles with each other, bringing in and together people who think differently about the world, and give them cookies. This is the world I want to live in, the shared world, and I bet it is a world that you want to live in as well. This can still happen anywhere. Not everything is lost.
So we will now extinguish the chalice. Please join me in the words that are on the screen. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts and out into the world until we are together again.
It sounds along the ages, soul answering to soul. It kindles on the pages of every Bible scroll. The psalmist heard and sang it, from martyr lips it broke, and the prophet's tongues outran it, till sleeping nations woke. From Zion's cliffs it echoed, it breathed from Judas' tree. It shone in Athens' market, it hallowed Galilee. The hammer stroke of Luther, the pilgrim's seaside prayer, the oracles of Concord, one holy word declare. It calls and lo, new justice, it speaks and lo, new truth, in ever nobler stature and on exhausted youth, forever on resounding, and knowing not of time, our laws but catch the music of its eternal chime.
Our closing words. As you prepare to leave this sacred space, pack away a piece of this church in your heart. Wrap it carefully as a precious gem. Carry it with you through the joys and sorrows of your days. Let its gentle glow strengthen you, warm you, remind you of all that is good and true until you gather here again in this place of love. Amen and blessed be.
So now's our chance for deeper check-ins. If you're online, there'll be a breakout session. We have coffee, but we don't want you to leave because we need you to stay to vote on whether or not we're going to have acoustic tiles. Thank you. Go in peace. Blessed be.